Have you ever held an old, worn-out object in your hands and felt as if it carried a voice of its own? A whisper from another time, another life? Today, we're not just talking about any shoes. We're talking about a pair of boots scuffed, cracked, heavy with dust that once walked through war. At first glance, they look like nothing more than junk you'd find in the back of a closet or at a flea market. But the truth is, these shoes have seen things no one should ever see. They have marched across fields torn apart by bombs, splashed through rivers of mud, and carried a young man further than he thought he could survive. This is not just the story of shoes, it's the story of a journey, of survival, of the human cost of war. And if you stay with me until the end, you'll discover a powerful reminder of resilience and sacrifice, one that might just change how you look at the things you own and the stories they hold. When we think about war, we often picture numbers, headlines, or black and white photographs. But war is also told through the things left behind. A dented helmet, a torn letter, a faded photograph, and in this case, a pair of boots. The boots belonged to Private Daniel Carter, a farm boy from Iowa who enlisted in the Army at just 19. He wasn't a hero by nature. He was shy, soft-spoken, the kind of boy who used to wake up before dawn to milk cows and help his father in the fields. When war broke out, Daniel didn't rush to sign up. But when his older brother was drafted, Daniel felt it was his duty to go too. He slipped on those brand new boots stiff, almost painful, and told his mother he would come back wearing them. But war changes people, and it changes the very objects they carry. Those boots marched Daniel into a world far away from his quiet Iowa farm. They sank into the mud of France, where trenches stretched for miles like scars across the earth. The soles grew thin from endless marches. The leather cracked from the cold rain, and the smell of gunpowder, of blood, of unwashed soldiers clung to them day and night. Yet for Daniel, those boots became something more than footwear. They were his shield, his anchor. Every step was proof that he was still alive. One story stands out in particular. It was a night raid. The sky was dark, the kind of darkness that feels heavy, pressing down on you. Daniel's unit had been ordered to move silently through a ruined village. The cobblestones were slick with rain, and each step risked slipping, making noise. Daniel later wrote in a letter that he prayed not for his rifle to hold steady, not for luck to be on his side, but for his boots to stay quiet. Can you imagine? In the middle of chaos, what mattered most was the sound of his shoes, because in that moment, silence meant survival. But war is cruel, and survival is never guaranteed. There was a winter day, bitter cold, snow falling thick like ashes. Daniel and his men were ordered to hold the line. Hours turned into days. The boots froze stiff. Daniel's toes went numb. He stamped his feet, trying to bring back feeling, but frostbite crept in. The boots, once his lifeline, were now betraying him. And yet, Daniel kept going. He kept marching, limping, dragging those boots forward. He wrote in another letter to his mother, "I sometimes think these boots know more about me than I do. They've carried me when I thought I couldn't move another inch. They've hidden my fear, step after step. They've seen my friends fall, and yet they keep me standing." Think about that. Imagine tying the same laces every morning, knowing you might not live to untie them at night. Imagine your entire world shrinking to the weight of your feet, pressing into the ground, step after uncertain step. One day, during a brutal battle near the Argonne forest, Daniel was injured. A piece of shrapnel tore through his leg. He fell hard into the mud, unable to stand. The chaos around him was deafening: shouts, explosions, the crack of rifles, and then suddenly, a friend, Corporal James, appeared. James grabbed Daniel under the arms and dragged him back toward safety. Daniel remembered looking down at his boots in that moment. They were caked in blood and mud, no longer recognizable as the clean leather he had once polished before leaving home. Yet, he thought, these boots have done their job. They've brought me this far. He survived that day, but he never returned to the battlefield again. His leg wound ended his service. He was sent home, hobbling, with his boots in a bag. The soles of Daniel's boots are worn so thin, you can almost see where his toes pressed hardest. The leather is cracked, in patterns like dried riverbeds. If you close your eyes while holding them, you might even imagine the sound of marching feet, the crunch of snow, the heartbeat of a boy trying to survive a war he never asked for. And yet, the story doesn't end there. Because what happened to those boots after Daniel's war years reveals something even more powerful. Something about memory, healing, and the way ordinary objects can carry extraordinary truths. When Daniel returned home from the war, the boots came with him. They weren't polished, nor were they fit for marching anymore. The leather was stiff, scarred by rain and mud. The soles, nearly worn through, carried the silent map of every battlefield he had crossed. He didn't wear them again. Instead, he kept them in a box. Some men brought home medals, others brought back scars. Daniel brought home a pair of boots that had carried him through hell. For years, the boots stayed hidden. Life moved on. Daniel learned to walk with a limp, using a cane on rainy days when his leg ached. He married a young schoolteacher named Margaret, built a small house on the edge of town, and planted apple trees in the yard. From the outside, he looked like every other man starting fresh after the war. But war never truly ends for those who fought it. Sometimes, in the middle of the night, Margaret would wake to find Daniel sitting at the kitchen table, the boots laid out in front of him. His hands traced the seams, the scratches, the faint outlines of mud still stuck in the stitching. She never asked what he was thinking. She knew the answer was too heavy for words. Years later, Daniel's children discovered the boots for the first time. They were playing hide and seek in the attic when little Sarah, only 7 years old, stumbled upon the wooden trunk. Inside, along with faded photographs and yellowed letters, sat the boots. To Sarah, they looked like something from a storybook, shoes belonging to a giant. She called her brother over, and together they tried to lift them. Too heavy, too worn. When they asked their father about them, Daniel paused for a long time. Finally, he said, "These boots walked me home." It wasn't until much later that the children began to understand what he meant. Objects can hold silence better than people. Daniel rarely spoke of the war. Like many veterans, he carried his memories quietly, choosing to protect his family from the darkness he had seen. But the boots remained, a quiet witness in the attic. And every now and then, when Daniel pulled out the trunk, his children would see the weight in his eyes as he touched the leather. Sarah would remember this moment years later, long after Daniel had passed. She said, "I think those boots carried more than just his body. They carried his fear, his hope, and everything he never said out loud." Time has a way of softening even the sharpest memories. By the time Daniel's grandchildren were born, the war was something they learned about from textbooks, black and white photos, and the occasional movie. To them, World War I felt as distant as ancient history. Until one Thanksgiving afternoon, the family had gathered at the old house, 3 generations crowded around the dining room table. After the meal, Daniel's son brought down the wooden trunk from the attic. He placed it on the living room floor and opened it for the grandchildren to see. Out came the letters, the medals, the faded photographs, and finally, the boots. The room grew quiet. The children leaned in close, touching the rough leather, feeling the deep grooves worn into the soles. They had never seen anything like it. It was then that Daniel's son began to read from one of the letters. His voice trembled slightly as he recited the words his father had written decades earlier. "I sometimes think these boots know more about me than I do. They've carried me when I thought I couldn't move another inch. They've hidden my fear, step after step. They've seen my friends fall, and yet they keep me standing." Silence filled the room. The grandchildren looked at the boots again, but this time not as old shoes. They saw them as survivors, as storytellers. That moment changed the family. The boots became more than an artifact, they became a bridge, a way for children born in peace to touch, quite literally, the reality of war. From then on, the boots were no longer left in the attic. They were placed in a glass case in the living room, where sunlight caught the worn leather each morning. Not as decoration, but as a reminder, every comfort they enjoyed, every freedom they lived with, had been paid for by steps taken in those boots. But the story doesn't stop at Daniel's family. Years later, Sarah, now grown, with children of her own, decided to donate the boots to a local museum. She hesitated at first. How could she part with something so deeply tied to her father's memory? Yet, when she thought about his silence, his midnight vigils at the kitchen table, she realized he hadn't saved the boots just for himself. He had saved them so others could know. The museum placed the boots in a war exhibit, under a soft spotlight. Beside them, Daniel's letter was displayed, his handwriting still sharp despite the yellowed paper. Visitors would stop, lean close, and read his words. Many walked away in tears. One veteran who visited the exhibit later wrote in the guestbook, "I came here expecting to see history. What I found was my own reflection. Those boots are my boots too." And here's the truth. Every war leaves behind objects like these. A mother's locket, a soldier's helmet, a child's toy carried through exile. They may look ordinary, but to the people who carried them, they were lifelines. When those objects survive, they hold more than dust, they hold voices. Daniel's boots are more than cracked leather and worn soles. They are a testimony. They remind us that behind every statistic is a life. Behind every war story is a beating heart. And as we look at them today, they ask us a question. What steps will we take, knowing the ground we walk on was once bought by theirs? The journey of the boots didn't end in war, or even in Daniel's attic. Their journey continues each time someone stops to look at them, to listen, to remember. Because history isn't just written in books, it's carried in the things left behind. And sometimes, all it takes is a pair of shoes to remind us of the weight of human courage. In the quiet halls of the museum, the boots sit under glass. At first, visitors glance at them the way you'd glance at any display, briefly, politely. But something happens when they pause, when they bend down, lean close, and read the letter beside them. It's as if the boots begin to speak. They don't tell stories of generals or battle strategies. They whisper of mud, of cold, of fear, of a 19-year-old farm boy who simply wanted to come home. And in that moment, visitors understand. War isn't just history, it's human. One afternoon, a young man in uniform stopped in front of the case. He was fresh out of training, his boots still stiff and polished. He stared at Daniel's worn-out pair for a long time. Then he read the letter, Daniel's words about being carried when he could no longer walk. The young soldier pressed his lips together, his eyes wet. Finally he whispered, "That's me. That could be me." The museum guide later said that the young man came back 3 more times during his leave, always standing silently before the boots, as if gathering strength from them. Another time, an elderly woman came with her granddaughter. She pointed to the boots and said softly, "Your great-uncle never came back. Maybe his boots look just like these." The granddaughter, no more than 10, traced the glass with her finger. For her, war had always been something far away, like a storybook monster. But now, standing in front of real, heavy boots that had touched real earth, she felt it differently. She tugged her grandmother's sleeve and asked, "Did he walk in shoes like that too?" The grandmother nodded, and tears slipped down her cheek. The little girl didn't understand everything, but she understood enough. These weren't just shoes, they were footsteps frozen in time. Stories like these spread. Local newspapers wrote about the exhibit, calling it the display that stops visitors in their tracks. Teachers began bringing students, asking them to write reflections after standing before the boots. Some wrote about courage, others about fear. One wrote simply, These shoes remind me not to waste the steps I'm given. And isn't that the point? Everyday objects can teach us more than textbooks ever could. They connect us across generations, across oceans, across battles we never fought. Decades after Daniel first tied those laces, his footsteps still echo, not only in his family, but in strangers who never knew his name. And here lies the truth. The boots themselves did not make history. Daniel did. But without the boots, his story might have faded into silence. Objects, when saved and remembered, become vessels. They hold not just material, but memory. That is why we must cherish them. Think about the things you keep. Maybe an old jacket from your father, a necklace from your grandmother, a letter tucked inside a drawer. To others, they might look like junk. To you, they are treasures, because they carry the weight of someone's life. Daniel's boots teach us this. History is not made only in palaces and parliaments. It is made in muddy fields, in quiet kitchens, in the silent march of ordinary people carrying extraordinary burdens. And as we close this story, I want you to imagine something. Close your eyes. Picture those boots cracked, heavy, stained by time. Picture the boy who once laced them, stepping away from his mother's porch for what he thought might be the last time. Picture him stumbling through mud, through snow, through fear itself, yet always moving forward. Now, open your eyes. Look down at your own shoes. Where are they carrying you? What stories will they tell when you are gone? Because in the end, every step matters. Daniel once wrote, "These boots have seen my friends fall, and yet they keep me standing." His words remind us that survival is never just about strength. It's about endurance, about moving forward even when the ground beneath you shakes. So when you feel tired, when life feels heavy, remember the boots. Remember the boy who kept walking, and let their footsteps remind you that you too can keep moving. History doesn't live in textbooks. It lives in the footsteps of those who walked before us. And sometimes it takes a pair of worn-out boots to remind us just how precious every step can be. Stories like these remind us of the footsteps we stand on. Hit subscribe, share this video, and keep watching, because the next chapter is just as powerful.